Hi, welcome to Constitutional Chats, hosted by me, Janine Turner,
and Cathy Gillespie,
with students
Dakari Chapman
and me, Tova Kaplan.
Join us as we discuss hot topic issues with constitutional experts. It's sponsored by Constituting America.
Welcome to Constitutional Chats. I'm Janine Turner, one of your co-hosts, along with Cathy Gillespie, Tova Kaplan, and Dakari Chapman. But today we have two very special guests. But as we said, it's Article 2, breaking down the Constitution on the way to Constitution Day. First, I'm going to tell you about Cathy Gillespie. Cathy Gillespie is co-president of Constituting America, and she's one of the 16 private citizens serving on the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission, which is helping organize the celebration of our country's 250th birthday in 2026. Very prestigious that she was asked to do that, and they are lucky to have her, is all I can say. And Cathy was also a chief of staff on the Hill in Washington, D.C. for over 20 years. So we're co-presidents. We launched this together in 2010. So what would I do without Cathy? Cathy, say hello.
Hi, everybody. We're glad that you're here. And Janine, I know you'll want to say a little bit about this too, but we want to thank our sponsor for today, Chris Foster, who is a former board member. We call him board member emeritus, and we are just so pleased and proud that Chris Foster is our sponsor for today.
Oh my goodness, Chris Foster. What can I say about Chris Foster? I met Chris Foster, maybe 11 years ago, in Portland, Oregon, and I was giving a speech, one of my first, and he stood up and said, I'm a believer in America, and he was a great patriot. And he said, and I'm a descendant of John Adams. I was like, oh my gosh. We became good friends right after that, and he has been with us with the foundation since day one. Everything this foundation is doing, Chris Foster has helped foster. And Chris Foster has donated his time, his intellect, his generosity of spirit, his patience, his passion for the Constitution, and his finances to bring Constituting America to life. And what would we do without Chris Foster? I consider him a dear, dear, dear friend that I will treasure forever. So thank you, Chris Foster, for what you're doing today in sponsoring this show. Okay, Dakari Chapman is not with us today, nor is Tova Kaplan, but we have two special guests. Wyatt Jonah Hensley were our 2018 Best Middle School Song winners. Wyatt and Jonah live in Joplin, Missouri. Wyatt is 15 and a sophomore in high school. Wyatt earned his Eagle Scout in January of 2020. Congratulations, Wyatt. He is involved with Student Council and the Future Farmers of America. And Wyatt says one of his closest friends is his brother, Jonah, who shares his interests except for acting. So I guess Wyatt wants to be an actor, which we're gonna have to talk. They're really excited to be a part of Constituting America. And Jonah is 17 and a senior in high school. Jonah achieved his Eagle Scout in 2017. That will stay with y'all for life, by the way. And he is a swimmer. Jonah is president of the local chapter of Future Business Leaders of America, DECA, and National English Honor Society. Jonah is also a member of the National Honor Society, Student Council, and a state degree holder for the Future Farmers of America. Both Wyatt and Jonah attended our September 2019 winter trip in Washington, D.C., where they got to have a 45-minute question and answer with Supreme Court Justice Roberts. How exciting was that? Say hello, Jonah and Wyatt.
Hello. Hey, guys.
Hey, glad to have y'all here. This is going to be fun.
Yes,
it will. Truly honored to be here and excited to learn about the Section 2.
And I love the shirts y'all have on, all red, white, blue, very patriotic. It's obviously not as hot there as it is here, 105. Drum roll, please. Drum roll, please. Are you ready for Professor Morrisey, back by popular demand? Okay, Professor Morrisey is a professor emeritus of politics at Hillsdale College, where he held the William and Patricia Lamoth Chair in the U.S. Constitution. He has a new book coming out this summer, Herman Melville's Ship of State. I cannot wait to hear about that book. And I'm going to tell you one of my favorite quotes from Herman Melville. Life's a voyage that's homeward bound. Isn't that a great quote? Okay, that's going to be a great book. We are so pleased to have Professor Morrisey's help over many, many years with Constituting America. Professor Morrisey has helped us design multitudes of our 90-day studies in the past, and he has written over 36 essays for our studies over the years. Our 90-day study, please check them out, great educational tools. Many of them that he wrote were our prestigious opening and closing essays. And on one of our mentor trips, Professor Morrisey joined the Constituting America Winners Trip at Mount Vernon in 2015 as our Dine with the Constitutional Scholar special guest. And it was a brilliant evening, I'm just here to say. So his other books, Self-Government, The American Theme, Presidents of the Founding and Civil War, The Dilemma of Progressivism, How Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson Reshaped the American Regime of Self-Government. That seems like a must read. And Churchill and de Gaulle, The Geopolitics of Liberty. Wow, I want to read them all. Professor Morrisey, welcome to Constitutional Chats.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me back.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, and we're going to talk about Article 2 today, breaking down the Constitution on our journey to Constitution Day, which is September 17th. So I know the way we're going to do it today is we're going to break this down in segments, and you're going to talk about segment 1 in Article 2 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then our sections, and then we're going to ask questions based on each section. So we'll let you start with your 3-minute overview or 3-minute discussion about Article 2, Section 1.
Well, it'll be the whole thing, just the introduction to the article itself, and then I'll go through the others afterwards.
Okay.
So anyway, the presidency is the executive branch. Executives execute. So the comparison would be a football team or a baseball team. The legislature acts as the kind of coaching staff. It runs the play. It doesn't run the play. It designs the play. The president is there to execute the play. Now that means that if the defense is aligned in the wrong way for the play to work, then the executive can change the play to some degree on the field. But basically, the purpose of the presidency fundamentally is to execute the laws of the land, including the Constitution. Now, the there are 4 sections to Article 1, and they each have a different topic. Article 1, Section 1 is basically the terms and conditions of the presidency, how you get to be president, how long the term is, what the oath of office is, and so forth. The second section is on the powers of the presidency, what he can do. And as with Article 1, which you discussed with Dr. Colleen Sheehan the last time, these are enumerated powers. These are powers that the president can exercise. Other powers that are not mentioned are powers that, by implication, he cannot exercise. The third section is the duties of the presidency. That's the moral component. He has these powers, but he also has certain things that he must do, that he's obligated to do with those powers. And finally, the fourth section is on the penalties if he doesn't perform according to his duties. There are 2 key quotes from Publius in the Federalist on the presidency. The numbers of the Federalist that pertain to the presidency are essays 67 to 77. And what he says, there are 2 points he makes. He says, there is hardly any part of the system which could have been attended with greater difficulty in the arrangement of it than this. In other words, they had more trouble defining the presidency. They had more trouble writing Article 2 than they had any of the other articles of the Constitution. The reason was that there was the great concern that this might turn out to be a kind of elective monarchy, and there are great pains to show why that is not the case. The second quote that is important, and it's linked to this one, is the true test of a good government is its aptitude and tendency to produce a good administration. That's the executive part of the executive branch. That's what you're dealing with when you're talking about, you're talking about how to administer the laws that are on the books. Publius also says that the key requisites to the job are energy and safety. And energy plus safety equals responsibility. Energy means that you have the powers to do the job. The safety means that you have responsibility to the people. You're elected indirectly by the sovereign people, and they also you can be removed from office if necessary. That's how it differs from a king. It's not hereditary as an English king would be. There's no life tenure as there would be in a kingship. You can be removed from office readily as a king cannot be. And what Publius says about this is it's not a monarchic branch, but a wholly Republican branch. That's a quote from him. It's a wholly Republican branch. It's there's no monarchic or aristocratic quality about it, other than the fact that, like a king, he is exercising executive power. So that's my summary of the overall article, and any questions are good.
Why don't we go down to the first, let's just do the first section, and then we'll ask questions.
Oh, okay. Well, the section 1 is, first of all, how you get to be president, and that's the Electoral College. When I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, when I first heard of the Electoral College, I thought that the Electoral College was some sort of educational institution. It turns out that it isn't. It just means colleagues, basically. It's the same thing. And it's based on state-by-state votes. The amount of votes you get in a state depends on how many representatives, House of Representative members that you have in that state. So it's tied to population. Every state obviously gets at least 2 votes because everybody has 2 senators and everybody has at least 1 House of Representatives member. So minimum of 3 votes. But the difference is the larger states like California and New York obviously have many more House of Representatives members. So you have, overall, you have 538 electors, including 3 from the District of Columbia, because the 23rd Amendment gave them 3 electors as well. And you need 270 to win. The purpose of it originally, the purpose of it was several things. Publius explains this. First of all, they wanted to, by making the Electoral College as a once in 4 years organization. It wasn't a permanent organization. It doesn't sit for all 4 years. The members are elected each time you have a presidential election. What this would do would be to avoid what he calls tumult and disorder. The kind of presidential elections we have today are very tumultuous and rather disorderly. They wanted to avoid that. That was one of the main purposes of having it done by the Electoral College rather than any kind of direct vote. It was therefore supposed to be a deliberative type of body, not just registering the votes of the people, but actually deliberating about who would be the president. You were electing, a little bit like you elect senators and representatives, right? You elect them to deliberate about the laws, not just to register popular opinion simply. The other thing they thought was that in having an electoral college as a temporary thing that only existed for a short time for every 4 years, you would avoid foreign influence in the selection of the president, and you'd also avoid corruption. Because if you have a sitting Congress or a sitting Senate that is electing the president the way you do in a parliamentary system like Great Britain, then you have lobbyists and people like that who can easily target the people who are in office. They're in office for years. They want to raise money for their next campaign, and so they're manipulable. Whereas they figured these people would not be so easily manipulable. So that's the Electoral College. They also mentioned that the salary of the president cannot be reduced during the president's term in office. Obviously, that means that the Congress can't punish the president monetarily. That's a separation of powers issue. The oath of office is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution under which he is elected. The 4-year term is for stability, more stability than you'll get in the House of Representatives, which is only a 2-year term. Re-eligibility, you get re-elected for good behavior in office. You also want a certain amount of a reasonably lengthy term so that the president can get to know the office. As you all know, in a new job, the first year is basically learning the ropes. And they want the president to be able to be there long enough so he knows really how to be president. And also he wants the person to be, they want the person to be ready for emergencies, to have the experience necessary to meet emergencies. If you think about World War II, for example, there weren't that many people who could have been the commander-in-chief of the American military in 1940 other than Franklin Roosevelt. They're just, if you'd had a new president at that time, that would have been very difficult to do World War II. So that's basically the Article 1, Section 1. Oops. I think I just cut myself off.
Okay. Well, I'm going to toss over Article 1, Section 1, Clause 8, which I think is the presidential oath, isn't it? Or Article 2, Section 1, Clause 8. But can you go back, because the Electoral College is so confusing to people, and describe that again? Because you said senators in the House of Representatives are part of the Electoral College?
No.
Did you say
They're
that?
not. No.
I didn't think that, but I thought that's what you did. You did mention senators and House of Representatives. That's why I'm confused.
Well, I mentioned them because that's exactly what you don't want in the Electoral College. You don't want people who are already in office, because then they're easily.
I heard that part. Yeah, I heard that part, but I thought at the beginning you mentioned Electoral College and senators and House of Representatives, and so I was, that kind of threw me. Okay. So the Electoral College are elected. Like the House of Representatives, to represent the body of that state or that area. Define the Electoral College.
It's state by state.
A little bit more.
So New York, for example, or Virginia, they elect their electors to the Electoral College. They're not directly, although the name of the presidential candidates is on the ballot. We're actually electing representatives, our own representatives, to elect those people at the Electoral College meeting.
To elect the president?
Yes.
And they could go against what the people say if they wanted to.
They can. They can in some states. Now, that's what's called a faithless elector, someone who does not go along with the person that person is committed to voting for. 33 states make that illegal. But there are the rest of the states you can do that, and it has happened. So yes, that is a possibility.
Do you know which states right off the top of your head allow them to change it if they want to?
I do not. No, that's.
Oh. Lisa's going to Google it. We'll have the millennial Google it. She already put her feet. Okay, so tell us, and then I want Jonah and Wyatt to ask their questions. Tell us what. Tell us how you become elected to be part of the electoral college.
Well, nowadays,
let's say I decided I wanted to do that. How does that happen?
Nowadays, what you would do would be to compete for your party's nomination. That's on the ballot. In fact, we just had a primary election here in Michigan last week, and some of the names, if you go in if you're a Democrat or a Republican, you go in and you actually vote for a slate of electors who are committed to the candidate of the Democratic or Republican Party.
In the primary vote is when you would vote for your elector?
That's what I did.
Okay, unless it's a faithless state. So in your primary,
no. In a faithless state, you do the same thing. It's just that
they're not. I think you said that you vote for that person that will be faithful to who the people elect, unless you're a faithless state, and then you don't have to do that.
You don't have to do that, but you're
supposed to. So, yeah, you're right. So in the primary election. The primaries, when you're deciding between two candidates of the same party, that's when the elector is there for you to
Yes.
You vote for them. Okay. Interesting. How was it in the olden days? How did they choose an electoral?
Well, in those days, it was the state legislatures who would do it. And as I recall,
maybe that's what I heard then.
Yeah,
Maybe that's what you were mentioning
state
earlier.
legislatures.
Okay.
That's right. And it was.
When did that change? When did that change?
It changed. Well, it changed basically because the party system came in. What happened originally was you had these state-by-state elections, these meetings, and the president would be the one who had the most electoral votes. The vice president would be the one who had the second most. And what that caused, of course, was something like the election when John Adams was elected. His vice president was his rival, Thomas Jefferson. Of course, that leads to horrible problems, right? Because you've got somebody who's your second in command in the executive branch who is against your programs. Furthermore, the vice president can cast the deciding vote if there's a tie vote in the U.S. Senate. So conceivably, you could have Jefferson.
That was changed.
The Adams administration. That was
changed. So when there were no parties, sorry to interrupt, but when there were no parties, the state legislatures would elect some electors based on consensus of how many people were in that state, and they would get together and deliberate about who they thought was best for presidency. And the American people didn't vote on it.
Well, yeah, in the
beginning they didn't. In the beginning they didn't vote,
right.
Like during Jefferson and Adams and Washington.
Right. And not directly, right.
When did the people start to directly be a part of the process with the electoral?
In the early 19th century, because that was important when the party system came about. Because the parties want their votes to be registered, their candidates to be.
So when the party system, and who was the father of the Democrats? Which president?
Thomas Jefferson.
No, it's another. He started the first party. Can't think of his name right now.
Well, Jackson, of course, did a lot to. I mean, you might be thinking of Martin Van Buren.
Yes, Martin Van Buren. He was kind of, I think. Okay, so fascinating. Now we know how you elect your elector and how it works. Lisa, did you find out the faithless states?
I did. According to fairvote.org, so I'm trusting their information. Idaho, North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Illinois, Kentucky, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, West Virginia, Georgia, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire.
Wow. Okay, we need to post that somewhere. We need to put that up later. I want to look at that again. That's fascinating. I live in Texas. Okay, Jonah and Wyatt, you're up. Why don't each of you ask a question or two?
First off, how did the founders of our Constitution come up with exactly 4 years for the presidency?
Well, of course, it could be 5, right? It could be the number in a sense is arbitrary, but the basic point is that they want it to be long enough so that the president can get some experience, can get his feet on the ground, can actually conduct policy for a while, execute policies for a while. But at the same time, they want it to be short enough so that he's still responsive to the people who are his constituents, the whole country.
Do you have another one? So one of mine was on clause 1. Why did the founding fathers not establish term limits for the presidency?
Because they wanted the president to be able to continue if he was a good president. They did not want the term limit only came in after people saw that Franklin Roosevelt had 4 terms. They thought that was a bit too long, and in fact it was, because he died fairly early in his 4th term. So that was what changed it. But before that, people thought that you should hold the president accountable in his 2nd term. He won't be a lame duck in his 2nd term, right? Typically nowadays, with the way it is now, the president, the last couple of years of his 2nd term, he a lot of times he can't do too much because people are waiting for him to leave.
And George Washington set the bar for that by retiring after his second.
That's right. And
actually, no one served more than 2 terms except for Roosevelt.
Exactly. So it became kind of whatever Washington did became a gold standard, and very significant too, because Washington, many people in Europe expected Washington to become a king-like figure, to serve his entire lifetime in the presidency, and his entire remaining lifetime in the presidency. And that's not what happened, because he wanted to make sure that people understood that this is not a monarchic job, that this is something that you go in for a couple of terms and then you leave. You're not a king.
Who was the Roman or the Greek that did the same thing? He turned over he won all these battles, and
yes, Cincinnatus. Yep.
Yes.
Cincinnatus was the Roman, and he could have, yes, that's right. He went back to his plow. He was a farmer, and he went back to his plow after having served in the Roman government. That's right.
And our founding fathers were very, very educated in Greek and Roman history, and so Washington was probably inspired by Cincinnatus.
Washington was often compared to Cincinnatus because he was a farmer, after all. And he went back to his plantation and became a private citizen.
Fantastic. Okay, Cathy, because we have 3 more sections in 30 minutes, I think we're going to have to make this a 2-parter.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Professor Morrisey. This has been fascinating, and I know we want to get to our next section, but before we leave section 1, we just have to ask about let's see, I guess it would be Article 2, Section 1, Clause 8, one of our favorite clauses that when Janine goes in and speaks to the schools, she always asks the kids, do presidents and the military swear their oath to protect the people or protect the Constitution? And of course, the answer is to protect the Constitution. And just wanted to hear from you, was there a debate over this, or how did that come about? Were there some of the founders want to have it say protect the people rather than protect the Constitution?
Not necessarily, because it's the same thing in a way. In other words, the Constitution is the one law that is the supreme law of the land, and the reason it is because the Constitution is the one law that is ratified by the people of the United States. And so that's it's their document. It's the people's document. And it's the people setting limits effectively on their own power. That is to say, on the power of their elected and appointed representatives. So because the Constitution, it's important for them to swear to the Constitution of the United States, to abide by that, because it's a limited amount of powers that you're getting. And if you're not willing to swear by the Constitution, then you're in effect saying, well, I want unlimited power. And that would be against that. That's exactly what the people wanted to get rid of when they wanted to get rid of George III.
Great answer.
Yeah, I've never really heard it put that way. Yeah, that's good. Cathy, do you have another question?
No, I'll take it back to you, Professor.
So now Article 2, Section 2, and talk about getting too much power. I think there's this part in this where the president gets too much power these days.
Yeah, there are 7 powers that the executive has, and I'll just enumerate them. This is
in Article 2, Section 2?
Section 2. Those are the powers of the presidency. And you're the commander-in-chief of the Army, Navy, and also the state militias, it points out. However, you can't declare war, and you can't raise and regulate the troops. In other words, you're not a monarch. That's what a monarch could do. It's the Congress. It's the people's representatives in Congress that can do that. The second power, of course, is the veto power. If the president disapproves of a piece of legislation that passes both houses, he can veto it. And the idea there, according to Publius, is to restrain the excess of lawmaking. Not too many laws. They don't want too many laws. The third power is to require written opinions of cabinet members on topics related to their duties as cabinet members. So for example, budgeting. each department member will ask for a particular sum for the budget and give an account of why he needs the money. The fourth power is to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except for, of course, impeachment. He's not a monarch. And this is especially true, Publius says, because we want this in there because if there's a rebellion, a well-timed promise of pardon, he says, may quell the rebellion. In other words, the leader of the rebellion might continue with the rebellion if he doesn't have any prospect of pardoning, because he has nothing to lose. But now if you offer him a pardon, if he puts down the arms, that might very well quell the rebellion. The other thing is treaties, right? Negotiating, not ratifying treaties, but the treaty power, negotiating treaties with Senate advice and consent. Again, not like a monarch who can do both negotiate and enact a treaty. And then the next power is the power of appointment, again, with Senate and advice and consent, appointment of cabinet positions and other officers. And the final one is appointment power for lesser appointments that may be vested in him by Congress, such as law courts, other departments, and so on. This is important because of civil service things. He also has, it also stipulates that he has no power whatsoever to grant titles of nobility, and he has no power to appoint church officers. So officers, because there's not going to be an established church in America, he has no power to do that. So again, that's an anti-aristocratic and anti-monarchic measure that they've built into the Constitution.
And Napoleon went right back and did that.
Oh,
he
sure
brought
did.
back the Catholic Church and said, "Crown me."
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Of course, that was
that's what some people expected George Washington to be. Now, Napoleon hadn't done that at the time George Washington was president, but they
it was later.
Napoleon, that kind of person. They were expecting that. Well, that happened in the French Republic, but not in the American Republic.
I know, the French Republic, they didn't do it as well as we did. Okay, I do want to just point out, and I want to move that, you know, Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 is one of my pet peeves, because I think that this whole new way of operating, where they, instead of saying it's a treaty, presidents call it an executive agreement, and then it doesn't have to be ratified. And since it's not, they skip that altogether, and so they're going and making all these deals and not really having to get ratification through. So it's pretty slippery. And I know that the Federalist paper says Article 2, Section, a treaty is a treaty is a treaty. A treaty is any kind of foreign agreement. But now they've kind of done this whole kind of duplicitous situation here.
There are three things that there are true treaties, right, which require 2/3 approval of the U.S. Senate. So, for example, Wilson's League of Nations treaty that he tried to get through didn't pass. That did not become a treaty. We've had a number of treaties over the years. There's also two kinds of agreements. One is a congressional executive agreement, which is basically done through a normal legislative process. The legislature approves of the terms of the treaty. The president signs off on it. The trade agreements, NAFTA, WTO membership, that kind of thing, those are congressional executive agreements. And then you have executive agreements, which are just the president alone doing that. And Jefferson made the distinction. He said that treaties can only be broken by the joint concession of both parties. That is to say, a treaty has to, if you have a treaty with England, for example, both parties have to agree that the treaty is broken. Otherwise, a deal is a deal. These other things can
when you say parties, what do you mean by parties?
Parties, I don't mean political parties. Sorry, I don't mean political parties. I mean both parties to the agreement. That is to say, if it's a treaty, it's an agreement between, say, the United States and France, or the United States and England. Those are the two parties that I mean. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Didn't mean to say that.
But it has to be ratified. But it had to be ratified by the Senate.
Yes, and those cannot. This is the key thing. Those cannot be broken unless both parties to the agreement, that is to say, both countries, agree to it. Other than that, they're written in stone. Now, the executive agreements and the congressional executive agreements, Jefferson says those are the types that can be abrogated unilaterally by either country, either party to the agreement. And these agreements have been much more common since World War II. Since 1946, we've had more than 16,000 of these agreements. We've had 912 treaties. Now, how did this?
Wow, write that down, Lisa, write that down. 16,000 executive agreements. And how many treaties?
Yeah, well, of the two types of agreements, congressional executive or just plain executive, 16
okay.
combined. I don't know how many.
And how many treaties? How many treaties?
912, or at least 912.
Wow.
That was as of a few years ago, but it's still pretty, it's in the ballpark. Now, what happened? You may ask, right? What happened well, there are two Supreme Court decisions. One was Missouri v. Holland, which was a 1920 court decision, and the other was U.S. versus Curtis Wright Export Corporation, which was a 1936 Supreme Court decision. Missouri v. Holland, the federal government can use treaties to legislate in areas that otherwise would fall within the state's purview. In other words, right now, according to the original Constitution, all the federal government can do is to exercise its enumerated powers, right? We've made that point very clear in many of these presentations, enumerated powers only. But what Missouri versus Holland says is the federal government can actually legislate beyond the enumerated powers. That's pretty significant, right?
What year was that?
1920. 1920.
Okay.
And
why did they make that decision? Why did they do that?
I'll tell you why. This was a case, Missouri, where there was a treaty that was signed between Canada, well, it was really Great Britain who controlled Canada in 1920, between Great Britain, the British Empire, and the United States, governing the, it was an ecological or conservationist type treaty where you couldn't shoot certain migratory birds within your territory. There were, geese, and they respect no boundaries, obviously. And so you couldn't hunt certain species of migratory wildfowl. And Missouri challenged this. They said, well, wait a minute, that's our purview. We're the state of Missouri. If we want our hunters to be able to go out and shoot to Canada geese or whatever they're shooting, we can let them do it, no problems. And the Supreme Court said, no, they sided with the US government. They said, no, the supremacy clause of the US Constitution, which says it's the supreme law of the land, applies to a treaty. Okay, it applies to a treaty. So even though this is not one of the enumerated powers to govern the local hunting laws, state hunting laws, they said, oh yes, it is if it's a treaty with a foreign power. And this was a decision that it was rendered famous, or in some minds infamous, by the famous claim that Oliver Wendell Holmes made in his decision, in his opinion that he wrote on this, where he starts talking about how the Constitution is not just something that's written in stone, it's a living, organic document that evolves over time. And this is how he's justifying this evolution of the Constitution, so-called, by doing that. So that's the first one. And then the other one, of course, is U.S. versus Curtis Wright. And U.S. versus Curtis Wright was the Roosevelt administration wanted to slap export duties on a couple of Latin American countries. And this was challenged in court. And what the court said was, and this is an extraordinary decision, they said that the executive, the president, has power to do pretty much what he wants to do when it comes to foreign policy. Now that makes it a king the King of England was considered the defender of the realm. He gets to do whatever he wants when it comes to foreign policy. As we just went over, the President of the United States does not get to do whatever he wants. He has enumerated powers. Well, the Supreme Court of 1936 basically let him go. And that's why you're getting so many of these. That's the explanation of why you're getting so many of these congressional executive agreements and simple executive agreements in terms of foreign policy now, as opposed to treaties.
That's fascinating. So it's the Supreme Court that's come in and altered the Constitution with their decisions, which is really, really interesting for all of us to think about, Wyatt and Jonah, right? Why they're giving the Supreme Court that kind of power. But are they doing this through executive agreements? And we've got to move on. We're going to have to do 2 parts. I knew this was going to happen when we broke it down. But are they, when they do that, when the Supreme Court made those decisions, was it through executive agreements and not treaties? Is that why executive agreements became popular? Because it doesn't have to be ratified by the Senate?
Curtis Wright was the president by decree, basically slapped export duties on 2 Latin American countries.
But through an executive order or through a treaty? Through an executive agreement or through a treaty?
It couldn't have been a treaty because, of course, who would be the partner in the treaty? In other words, it was an executive action. Obviously, the 2 Latin American countries are not going to go for that kind of deal. See, as far as I know, it was just an executive decision, and the court ruled that yes, he can do that because it's foreign policy. He can't do that in domestic policy, but he can do it now in foreign policy.
Okay, well, I know we have to move on for this, but just for clarity's sake, the Iranian deal that President Obama did, there was a big hoopla afterwards at the Senate and the House, even though it was only what they couldn't ratify it because he called it an executive agreement. Is this the kind of thing you're talking about that the Supreme Court gave him permission to do?
Yes.
Okay. So in essence, the Supreme Court gave him permission to do these executive agreements, which don't have to be ratified by the Senate.
Well, they gave him an open door to do it more so than in the past. There were some of these things that were done in the past. Jefferson defines the difference between these several things, so he's well aware of these things. But but they weren't used nearly as much. Let's face it, the presidency has been greatly empowered in the past 80 years, let's say, and that's one of the Supreme Court allowed to do that.
An executive agreement comes out. An executive agreement comes out of which one of the 8 powers?
Well, it doesn't come. You mean originally? It would
during Jefferson's time, before the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it would. Well, it basically comes out of the treaty power, but it's a kind of elaboration of the treaty power.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we need to move on. I could still think this is. I'm not resolved on this yet, but go ahead, Jonah and Wyatt, and ask a couple of questions each.
Yes. Going back to the Supreme Court justices, this kind of goes along with it, but I'm curious as to know whether you think if there's any power specifically given within Section 2 that's more important than any of the others.
Oh, which ones are the most important?
Yeah.
I would say the commander-in-chief, because that's war and peace, right? So I would say that's probably the most important one. Don't forget, a president, this is the key thing about that. The president cannot declare war. That's the congressional prerogative. However, the president can certainly fight a war without a declaration of war, can't he? Because we've only had 5 wars that were actually declared wars. And what we fought, at least 200 or more wars in the course of American history, including some fairly big ones. Korea was an undeclared war, Vietnam, an undeclared war. The wars in Iraq, the 2 wars in Iraq, the war of Afghanistan, those are all undeclared. And the reason that you can do that is that let's say you're the president in, I don't know, 1820 or something, and if the British or some other foreign country decided to invade the United States, you can't just wait around for Congress to convene. They may not be anywhere near Washington, right? And in those days, they couldn't get back very soon. So you've got to, this is part of being an executive, you've got to execute and defend the constitutional union of the United States. And if somebody attacks you, a good example of that would be a nuclear war, right? You can't wait around for a declaration of war if there's going to be a nuclear war. You've got to respond fairly quickly to that. And so lots of wars that we've had are undeclared wars, and that gives the president a power of life and death, right? So I would say that's pretty significant.
Go ahead, you can
Actually,
ask
there's
another
a
question.
on this one.
Go
So,
ahead,
Jonah,
y'all ask.
Another one, going back to why do you think that the founding fathers gave the president the power, even though it's just to appoint Supreme Court justices, but that's still a major part of our government. That's one of the three branches of government. Why do you think they gave him or her the power to appoint these judges who have such an influence on our government?
So somebody has to appoint them and somebody has to approve of them, right? So the question is, which branch of government is going to do that? Obviously, the Supreme Court is not going to be a self-perpetuating body. This is a democratic republic in the sense that the people are the sovereigns, and their elected representatives should be in control of the nomination and approval process of their Supreme Court. So the question then becomes, who appoints and who approves? Well, it could be that the Congress appoints and the president approves, right? Or the way we have it, which is the other way around. And the idea there is that the final approval should be with the most democratic and broadest branch of government, which is the legislative branch, and therefore that means that the president should be the one who appoints.
Could the Supreme Court could it get politicized by having?
Well, yes, and it's always been politicized in the sense that, for example, John Marshall, right, was the great Supreme Court justice, the first one who was considered a great Supreme Court justice. He was a member of the Federalist Party. And for many years, the Democratic Party, including especially Andrew Jackson, they were not particularly pleased with having John Marshall as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So there are always going to be these issues of how a particular judge interprets the Constitution, how strictly according to the letter of the Constitution, or is he going to do these kinds of things like those court cases that I mentioned, where they think of the Constitution as an organic living document that they get to shape. Marshall used to say that the Supreme Court says what the law is, and what he meant by that is that they apply what the written law of the Constitution is to a given case. But some of these later judges are doing quite differently, right? They're basically quote unquote interpreting the Constitution, but they're really pushing it in one direction or another. Maybe that's what you mean by politicizing it. I'm not sure, but if you mean that by politicizing, then yes, you have to. But it may very well be, right, that one political party or the other might want to politicize it in that sense, that they want a certain doctrine of loose construction rather than strict construction of the Constitution to prevail, because they figure, well, we'll control the appointment process and we'll get guys who are going to save us the trouble of having to go through the controversy of enacting laws. They'll just say what they'll come up with these creative interpretations that save us the trouble of raising the wrath of the American people and getting ourselves unelected.
So constitutional review doesn't always keep people within our leaders, our presidents, or the Congress within the bounds of the Constitution. Sometimes constitutional review goes outside the bounds of the Constitution. It's interesting. I've always sort of thought of it the other way, but actually that hasn't been the case. So constitutional review with John Marshall, I think Thomas Jefferson really was sort of legitimate in being upset with him, right?
Well, it depends on how he was genuinely trying to interpret the Constitution. He wasn't trying to rewrite it. And Jefferson.
But others haven't since then. Others have not.
But others are like Oliver Wendell Holmes, for example, who says it's an organic document that's always evolving. Well, okay, then who's in charge of the evolution? Oh, it's me, Oliver Wendell Holmes, and my colleagues on the court.
Very fascinating. Okay, we have 5 minutes left. We're gonna have to do this in 2 parts. Cathy, because I talk so much, it's my fault. Because I just want to know more. But Cathy, go ahead.
Well, no, it's great. It's been such a great discussion. Professor Morrisey, we've got some wonderful audience questions, and if we don't get to them all this time, hopefully when we do part 2, we can get to some of them as well. Kim Jones asked a question that I was wondering also. Is there a difference between executive orders and executive agreements? And then also, I just wanted to add on this whole thing with czars, which just seems to have popped up over, in this past 100 years or so, because that's obviously czars aren't mentioned in the Constitution. Is that within presidential power to appoint czars?
Okay, well, the first thing is that the difference between one of these foreign policy agreements and an executive order is that the executive order is for domestic stuff, whereas the agreements have to be an agreement between the United States and some foreign country. It's treaty-like. It's not strictly speaking a treaty, but it's treaty-like, whereas an executive order is not a treaty at all. It's just an order done by an executive, a kind of executive fiat, and it aims at domestic issues exclusively. They're somewhat similar, but in the sense that they are a pure executive agreement would be something that no other branch of government got involved with. Although again, they are subject to constitutional review by the Supreme Court. So, as are executive orders. Now, the czar business is a different thing. That is they claim that that's part of their appointment power. But like so many other things, here's a good question to think about. Why is it? What justifies the president? Why do people in the past 100 years think that presidents are supposed to take these greater powers upon themselves and even be handed them in some cases by the Supreme Court, right? Why is that? The answer is that under the old dispensation of the Constitution, the basis of the Constitution, as we all have emphasized again and again in these chats and also in the different articles that have appeared on the website, under the old dispensation, the idea of where rights come from and where powers legitimately come from is from the laws of nature and of nature's God. The laws of nature and nature's God are there; they don't change. Right? Human nature does not change. What is an unalienable right for me now was also an unalienable right by nature to anyone, at any time in human history. So that conduces, right, to a stable understanding of what a constitution is. You want a constitution that stays the same unless it is deliberately amended by the constitutional process that leads to amendments. Now, on the other hand, if you derive political and moral right not from nature, something that's permanent, but from the course of events, from history defined as the course of events, and history is progressing and it's changing and it's evolving, then what is the source of political authority? It's no longer looking back at your unalienable rights. It's looking ahead to what the next step of history is going to be. And that means what you want is leadership. George Washington didn't think of himself as a leader except when he was a military leader. Then he was leading his men into battle. But he didn't think of himself as a leader when he was president. He thought of himself as an executive, as a statesman, right? And so did all the earlier presidents. The notion of leadership, where your legitimacy comes from being on the cutting edge of history, that's where you get these greater powers, because you want to be able to have an executive who's going to show us the way forward. And that's just a fundamental distinction between the attitude of the founders and the attitude of many of the presidents of the past century.
So, yeah, and they call that in law school something. The one is the nature's law, when you learn about nature's law, but the other is that there's a new natural law, and then there's a new law, which is what you're talking about. What's the coined phrase for that?
And law
that they
school,
teach in most law schools now.
Now I never went to law school, so but I think that what it would be historical laws or laws of history. Now, what they call that in law school, I don't know. There's also there's also a distinction, a very legitimate distinction, right, between natural law and civil law. The Constitution is a man-made, a civil law, but it's supposed to be in conformity with natural law, which are endowed by the laws of nature and of nature's God. Nature's God, the creator, defines those.
Which all goes back to the Declaration of Independence, where our, higher power, so to speak, gives us our inalienable laws, and we get to create the government, and the government is accountable to us.
Yes.
And what's happening now is people think the past 100 years that the government should be telling us what to do instead of we tell the government what to do.
The government becomes sovereign instead of the people, because the government is supposed to lead the people toward the next stage of human history, which is unfolding and evolving all along.
Which is very dangerous, very dangerous. Wow. Well, it's 2:03. We could have done this for hours, but it's a good thing we have a cutoff time, because we would be exhausting you, Professor Morrisey. We would just be tapping into your brain.
Wasn't there a movie about that? Donovan's Brain or something?
What was it called?
Donovan's Brain.
Oh, I don't know.
It's probably before your time. It was a schlocky 1950s horror movie.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so frightening. Well, and we're going to have Wyatt Jonah back, because we didn't get to hear a lot from them. It goes so quickly when you break it down into sections too. And Jonah and Wyatt, thank you for being our Constituting America contest winners. We're so proud of you, and thanks for joining us today from Missouri.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's very fun, very interesting.
Thank you, Professor Morrisey. Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me.